price crashed and no one would talk to me. People really have no idea. I fell into the trap of,
how did you come up with the idea?
Everyone was sort of like, wow, like, you've made it. But pretty quickly I started to see like there is a heavy cost to all of this. And the cost is like keeping your mouth shut about the corruption and the lies and everything that you see. That's wild. That is really wild. When I came back to the States, it blew my mind how dishonest everyone was being. Obviously in China, there's a lot of censorship, but the censorship here in the United States is worse. Since when can we not just have a conversation?
You also started a podcast, right?
I'm in the process. It's kind of on hold. I had an idea too. It really sort of developed naturally because I was having all of these incredible conversations with people that I went to boarding school with and that I knew in DC, people with very high level jobs on Wall Street and politics and things like that. And I would get like the craziest questions from them. And I was just like, I have to record these conversations. And of course, once I, did the research and kind of got myself organized, then the price crashed and no one would talk to me. They didn't care. So I'm starting to get a little bit of phone calls and interest again. I think as the number goes up, we get attention and the people, the normies, the no coiners, right? They start to call you again. So I'm just kind of waiting for that. I tried to chase everybody down for a little while and get them to talk to me, and their interest was just so low. So the whole point really was to talk to people who were pre-Bitcoin, right? People who are not in our little world here. So I have to wait for them to be ready, but I think the time will come soon. We'll get the ETF approvals here in the United States, and they'll all want to talk to me. So as soon as that happens, I will be hitting record and I will have my podcast.
That's an interesting thing, having people outside of Bitcoin in the Bitcoin podcast. Will it be like how will the format go?
So just casual conversations. I'll tell you the very specific question that clicked in my brain is I had this great guy who I went to boarding school with. He's really smart. He is in charge. I don't want to dox him, but he has a really high profile job in the live events world. And he's super, super smart, very successful. And we sat down and he said to me, so if I buy Bitcoin, what happens? Like, do I get anything physical? And I just died laughing. Like, no, the whole point, it's digital, whatever. And he kind of stopped me and he was like, look, this is not a dumb question because until 2013, which, 10 years ago now, but not that long ago, when you purchase certain stocks on the US stock exchange, they would mail you a physical certificate of ownership.
Actually.
Yeah. And so I thought, wow, like I actually didn't really know that. When I thought about it, I thought, oh yeah, I do kind of remember my parents maybe having those. I remember being aware of that. But that opened up this whole conversation and it just struck me like the Bitcoiners might laugh at that question, as I did. I laughed. But then when he explained his perspective and kind of why he was asking and where the question came from, my mind was a little bit blown. Like, wow, we are so far ahead than we even know. You get off Twitter, you get outside the world of Bitcoin, and people really have no idea. Even the people, that we look at and maybe deem like very successful or smart in whatever industry that they're working within. So basically, I'm just going to say to my friends, I'll answer all your questions, but you have to let me record the conversation.
That's an interesting concept. It would be interesting how many people are willing to get on a Bitcoin podcast without being in Bitcoin. It's really interesting.
Right. Well, so far, no, that's not true. I do have 2 episodes recorded. One is with my brother, who I kind of bullied into talking to me. And the other is a super interesting conversation that I had with a former colleague of mine who lives in China. and he manages a media network there and a huge network of outbound investment organizations. So basically, wealthy people in China who are trying to take their money out of the country. And so, again, even with him, I presumed his knowledge to be way beyond where it was. They use Tether, they use, USDT to transact when they can't get in and out of dollars. And so I thought he would know a lot more than he did, and he really didn't. He had a ton of questions for me, and that was a super interesting conversation.
That's interesting about you in general. I researched a little bit, and you have a pretty rich before Bitcoin life. Like for
Yeah.
example, for me, I'm 25 now, and I'm in Bitcoin. I'm getting to the 4 years mark. So my basically, I lived up my professional career and with Bitcoin.
Okay.
And you are 35 around then?
I'm a little older than that, but I'm almost 40. So
Okay.
I'm
So
older than people think I am. Yeah.
yeah. So you for in 20 years ago, you basically were like around 20, like before
Yes.
20,
Yes.
and there were no Bitcoin. How did
Right.
your whole growing up in a fiat world started?
I did. I did, and I really was caught up in it. It's super interesting for me to look back with a new lens. I knew nothing. I'm so jealous. I think I wish, obviously, that I had discovered Bitcoin earlier. I think i- it's incredible the opportunity that you have. I'm not bothered by my age. I think there's lots of life to be lived still. But yeah, I look back. Do you know Eric Kaysen?
No,
Are you familiar with him? So Eric Kaysen talks about Occupy Wall Street and how, he got into Bitcoin because of Occupy Wall Street, which of course is sort of the beginning of Bitcoin. If we look back, um, Bitcoin kind of came out of Occupy Wall Street. Are you familiar with the Occupy Wall Street movement?
no.
Okay, so this is basically, it was a very significant and prolonged protest that happened here in the United States in 2008, prior to the massive crash that happened, and then the bank bailouts.
Hmm.
It might have been in response to the bank bailouts. I'm not. I should do some research and get more familiar with that. But what I do know is that the Occupy Wall Street protests were happening in D.C., right at the Federal Reserve, right downtown by the White House. And during that time, I was working in startup world, and the garage that I parked in, I would walk past the protesters every single day for weeks. They had these parks occupied. And I remember being so annoyed and frustrated just at the actual like logistics of the protest, because it was an inconvenience to me. And, at the time I was working really long days. I was going in early, I was leaving late, and it was just like, oh, another thing I have to deal with to get, home and back on my computer. Um, and I didn't understand at the time really, now of course I agree so strongly with everything that they were fighting against and sort of rallying around. But I think this speaks to the divides that are created. Like, I have always thought of myself as very libertarian. I didn't want to be involved in politics, kind of like live and let live. And I fell into the trap of, being divided and kind of turned against these people because they were very politically active and they were fighting the system. And what you don't realize until you really take the time to study it all is that we really all want the same thing, and that we're really a lot more aligned than, the globalist agenda would have you believe, or your, local political higher ups, or whatever you want to call them. I think there is, around the world, there's an agenda to keep people divided so that we can't cooperate and better fight the systems.
And when did you throw that Fiat mindset out of your life?
It was not until 2017. Um, Admittedly, I just kept in my Fiat career. I moved to Dubai. I worked in startups, so a lot of my friends and colleagues were moving to Silicon Valley, and I didn't want to do that. So I got this crazy idea to move to Dubai, and I did that. And it wasn't until I got recruited to work in foreign direct investment. I don't know,
How
did
did
you
this?
read the pinned tweet?
Yeah, yes, but I'm really interested. How did you come up with the idea to move to Dubai? Like, I moved once to Munich, but this was
Hmm.
completely work related.
Okay.
I would not come up with myself like, oh, let's just move to somewhere completely else.
I've always kind of gone against the grain. I have always, if everyone was doing something, I just naturally didn't want to do it. So again, everyone assumed that I would move to Silicon Valley, and I thought, no, I don't want to do it. So I had, fortunately, this period of time um, where I was able to travel, and I started going places. I spent a fair amount of time in Europe. I went to all the islands in the Caribbean, and I got bored very quickly. I was like, this is all kind of the same. So I was exploring online, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I actually found this friend from like middle school who was living in Abu Dhabi. And I thought, now this is a place I know nothing about. Um, so I got in touch with them and ended up going to visit. And I was there initially for 2 weeks. And by the end of that 2 weeks, I just made up my mind like, everything there is wild. It admittedly is very Fiat, lots of supercars, lots of show. And have you ever been to Dubai?
Yes, but I was really small. Like I was like
Younger.
15 or something with my parents.
Okay. Dubai has a reputation, and I think it's accurate. But to me, it was just really interesting. It was one of the first places I had ever been that was not the same as everywhere else. And that's what I wanted. I am always trying to learn and find new things. So I've also just kind of been like, all right, let's do it. And I was there visiting, like I said, and I thought this is where I'm gonna go. I really wanted to get out of DC. I think I was starting to feel, you know, um, the I didn't know it at the time, but it's all of these fiat systems that sort of run your life, and I didn't want to get caught up in that. So I thought by leaving DC that I would get out of it, and of course, I just ended up in this crazy adventure. But it led me here, so I think I'm okay with that.
And when did you then get rid of the Fiat mindset?
So I got recruited. I was working for a consulting company in foreign direct investment, and I like to say this was like a crash course in fiat corruption. And I think at that time is when I learned really how much how much I didn't know. I thought I was having success. I was making more money than I'd ever made. I had this, cool title. I had an unchecked expense account. Everyone was sort of like, wow, like, you've made it. And that's how I felt for a little while. But pretty quickly, I started to see like there is a heavy cost to all of this. Um, and the cost is like keeping your mouth shut about the corruption and the lies and everything that you see. So that made me very uneasy. And I lasted not quite about 2 years, just a little less than 2 years. I worked in this world. And I burnt out in flames. And I'm not going to lie, it took a little while for me to process everything in retrospect and really understand what had happened and why. So I knew something was wrong, much sooner than I knew really all of the details and understood the complexities. But that started my journey, and I'm still learning. I think it's an endless task.
So the Fiat system basically burned you out.
It did. It burnt me out very seriously. Um, and so I just sort of like laid low for a while and studied. I put my, head kind of into the sand and studied everything that I could so that I understood the systems. I knew the systems were all being manipulated, but I didn't understand the systems well enough. I remember starting to consume like the macro conversations that we see everywhere in Bitcoin, and I didn't even know what fiat was. um I had been through economics classes, I had been through university and had a degree and all of these things, and I remember thinking like, wait, fiat, I'm not sure that I understand completely what that means. Austrian economics I was not super familiar with. um, and in retrospect, you start to understand these things, and then you start to understand, I think the next level is seeing that the ignorance is by design. When you take an economics class, they're teaching you Keynesian economics, and there's no discussion to alternatives. That, as far as they're concerned, there's no alternative system that exists.
Yeah, it's funny. I talked last week with someone that studied economics in Austria, and I asked him, okay, as an economics student in Austria, did you heard about Austrian economics before Bitcoin? And he's like, no,
Right.
there was
Wow.
nothing in the university, and he fulfilled the university,
Right.
nothing with Austrian economics in Austria.
That's wild. That is really wild. Yeah, you start to have these conversations and look at it, and I mean, even that's eye-opening. um it has to be just by design. I think you can't understand any of it and not understand that it's by design. But of course the learning curve is massive, not only to learn all of this, but to unlearn. I think that's really what takes the time, right? Is to unlearn everything we've learned, and then you're open to everything else.
That's crazy. So you threw away your fiat mindset slowly because the fiat system basically burned you out. You learned your lesson, you learned the system, and then you find Bitcoin. How did you manage that?
So I first heard about Bitcoin thanks to a Russian kid at a conference in Cartagena, Colombia. And I was sitting in a corner. Um, I was, at the tail end of that career, really wanting out, but not understanding exactly how I could get out yet. Um, and he said to me, "Have you ever heard of cryptocurrency? Do you know what Bitcoin is? Do you know what Ethereum is?" Um, and so I hadn't, I kind of triggered in my brain. I had some friends in DC in like 2011 that were on Silk Road. Um, and so they say, like, when's the first time that you ignored Bitcoin, which I would say was 2011. Um, but this time I was in a very different place. And so I was really desperately looking for a way out of the fiat world. And so I had the conversation with this guy, and I went and looked up everything that I could find. I Googled, Bitcoin. I actually set up a Google alert so that every single hit that out in the wild, anytime Bitcoin was mentioned, it would come to my inbox. And I don't know that you could do this now because it's everywhere, it's more ubiquitous. But at the time, there was relevant information coming in from, just really random websites or news articles or blogs. And again, I think it's one of these things where the more I learned about that, the more I realized I needed to go learn about other things so that I could understand them and, I guess let them go.
What did Bitcoin made you like? What in Bitcoin made you click? Like what learning or what sentence you heard? What interview? What made you? Oh wow, that's the thing.
There's been a couple. Um, I think the concept of Bitcoin being unconfiscatable was really important to me. Um, I understood, almost immediately that they could affect or regulate the on and off ramps, but as long as you have your Bitcoin in cold storage, it's yours. And so that was one of the most powerful things for me. Um, and just being able to transact or participate outside of the system has always been the most important thing. Um, I think in when I started, a lot of it for me was about the technology and also being outside the system. But I studied the technology first because, I was working in startups and my background's computer science. But in more recent years, more recently, I would say that the thing that I share most right now is the Michael Saylor interview with Tucker Carlson, where he talks about energy and how Bitcoin, takes the energy of your productivity and allows you to save it and to really own it. So there have been a lot of things over the years, but since that came out, I think to me that's been the most powerful thing.
And you not only went ahead and saved your financial energy in Bitcoin, but you also moved your business career and your um, career in general to Bitcoin. Why
I
did
did.
you why did you do that?
I did that because it really became the only thing that I could bring myself to care about. Um, after I left Fiat World, I did a little bit of consulting because I had to pay the bills. Um, and I was working for myself. And so I thought briefly, okay, I'm working for myself, I'm safe, right? Um, from all of this that I've just burnt out of from Fiat World. But what you realize really quickly is that you're still subject to having clients and what they might think of you. Like you can still get canceled because I found myself like being nervous to be honest about my opinions about things because I didn't want to lose my consulting clients. And so that didn't last very long. Um, I'm like, I just left my entire career because I didn't want to participate in lies. I'm not going to do it in my own life. Um, so I quit that and I just went full time into Bitcoin. That's when I started tweeting and just being really honest about how I felt about everything. When I came back to the States, it blew my mind how dishonest everyone was being. I was, in Dubai, in the Middle East, in Asia. I spent a lot of time in China. There was a lot of very honest discourse about politics in the United States. And of course, this was a critical time. Trump got elected. And I was very shocked to come back to the US and find the absolute craziness. I didn't really have an opinion because I hadn't been living here. Um, but I was shocked at the degree to which you could no longer be honest. And so ultimately, Bitcoin became, you know, again, the escape where if you were being honest, um, Bitcoin represented the truth. And I think that's really what drove me to the point where I couldn't care about anything but Bitcoin and speaking the truth, whatever the cost. So
That's an amazing story. How did this change you further than just being able to tell the truth? Bitcoin on a being completely on a Bitcoin standard kind of.
I think absolutely, they say that you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And I think that that's true. Um, even in retrospect, like I look back at my career and how much of my life was not honest. Like the job that I had in foreign direct investment, I think is a really good example of that, because everyone in my life, thought that I was doing so well, and I let them think that. What are you going to tell people? No, I don't deserve the title that they gave me. You know, it's not all it's cracked up to be. Like, oh, I'm actually broke even though I'm making all this money because my expenses are so high. You know, there's all of these truths that just get in, or not truths, but like dishonesties, I think, that get built into our lives. And it's a lot of work to unravel that. I left that career and it took a long time to figure out, how do I even explain that everything is a lie? So, you have to do a lot of work on yourself to get to a point where you can talk about that in a way that makes sense. I still am often not sure that I'm articulating it well. I need to do more work, in explaining myself, and not just like rambling. But yes, I think Bitcoin really changes you. And if you embrace um, Bitcoin and what Bitcoin stands for, it's going to make you a better person. It's going to improve your life in I can't see any way in which it does not improve your life.
You're now my 16th person that I interview, and I try to get to as many Bitcoiners as I possibly can. I started with one person a week, ramped it up to two persons. Now I'm thinking to start with three persons a week because I just love it so much. And one thing stands out with almost everybody I interviewed. First of all, they are all really unique persons. But second of all, they had a Bitcoin moment. And the Bitcoin moment was always a moment where their career, their life, their their like mindset and spirit also changed a little bit. Why do you think Bitcoin can drastically change people? I mean, at truest form, it's just money. It's just an asset that you can buy, you can sell, you can trade it with other people. Why does Bitcoin has this power of changing people?
I think, well, I want to say I agree with you completely. I love talking to Bitcoiners and living, in this Bitcoin world community, whatever you want to call it. It is very powerful. And I think the reason that it's so powerful is because it represents the truth, and because fiat really drives, as I said, I was really being dishonest with everyone, including myself. And so it's very, very freeing to let go of all of that and not have to keep track of the lies that you're telling everyone, again, including yourself. Um, and just be yourself and be honest. How could that not change you? If you look around, and I'm really stuck on this: speak up, speak your truth, and be honest. That has become like my core mission, because I think that's the thing that frees you, and Bitcoin allows you to do that. So many of the problems that we see around us, whether it's, whatever whatever it may be, there's a lot of problems, right? It's this endless task to list them. But if everyone just spoke up, I think we all agree on many things, but people are too afraid to go against the herd. And so they're too afraid to speak up and say, actually, I'm not sure about that. Bitcoin gives you, I think, the courage to speak up and be honest. And so that's really, really powerful.
You lived in like a lot of different countries. You lived in China, you lived in Dubai, in America, you lived in many different places where freedom is also on a different kind of level, I would say. How did China, Dubai, America, the contrast between those countries also change your view on freedom or form your view on freedom in general?
Yeah. The contrast was definitely very educational. So I was in China at the end of my career. I had spent the most amount of time in China right before I came back to the United States. And obviously in China, there's a lot of censorship, but they're very out in the open about their censorship. You can't get on a computer and go to Google something. You can't access Google. You can't criticize the government. It is what is it is. It's a fact. And the thing that was most striking to me was coming back to the United States in 2018 and seeing how much of our freedoms had been restricted and how unaware everyone was about that. And that contrast was the thing that I got stuck on. And I'm still stuck on it. And back in 2018, 2019, people really thought I was crazy because I was saying, in a way, the censorship here in the United States is worse because I don't know what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say. Like, you know, what if I think some of the things Trump has done are good? Like, can I say that? Who is gonna not be my friend because I say that? I was in Shanghai at a dinner with a bunch of colleagues, and this gentleman said to me, "You must be so proud of this businessman. He gives up his whole life to represent you and your country." And I thought that's um, it's a really unique and honest view of Trump. And whether I agree with that or not, it's hard to argue that, right? Like he did do that. Um, and I was trying to have these conversations with people here in the US, and nobody would speak to me. I mean, people were just like, you can't ask me that. I'm not going to tell you what I think. Like, you're going to get me fired. My wife is going to leave me. Oh, my husband will yell at me. Like, I was like, am I in the United States? Like, and very quickly I got to the point where I was like, look, I don't care if you love him. I don't care if you hate him, but like, please, someone speak to me. Like, since when can we not just have a conversation? Um, and of course, Trump is like the hot, the big ticket item, but that kind of like triggered something in my brain. And I started watching other things. And there were so many other things that everyone was too scared to be honest about. Um, you have the transgender movement, you have a lot of things, free speech itself, and the fact that governments are trying to make, hate speech illegal. I know there are a lot of countries in Europe where this is sort of further down the path than here officially in the United States. But I would bring this up and I would say, well, what do you think about hate speech? Like, should hate speech be illegal? So there was just this really long list of things that nobody would talk to me about. And it was so jarring to me because I had just come from China, where you have to watch everything you say, right? Um, and I didn't expect to come back to the United States and for it to be the same, again, sort of worse, because no one would admit that they were living like this. Like, I was like, you guys are too scared to talk to me about the president, like, you can tell me you hate him. You can tell me you love him. I don't care. I love you either. Like, and people were too scared to give me their opinion. It just, I'm still processing it. I mean, it's something that I still have a hard time with. So there were some really lonely years that I had. And then when COVID came, a lot of people woke up and I got a lot less like, you're completely nuts, and a lot more like, oh, wow, maybe the government is capable of doing that. Maybe they are really doing that. What did you say before about, governments doing this or that? So people were more willing to talk to me, but still there's still a lot of people who refuse to have a lot of conversations.
Yeah. And nobody thought they will completely shut down the country. This
Right.
took everybody by surprise, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So those experiences informed, my views and thoughts and opinions on freedom very dramatically. I find myself missing Dubai a lot. It was very safe. Um, and I spent a lot of time thinking, like, what is it about Dubai? And I kind of come to the same conclusion, which is that in Dubai, the rules and the restrictions are very clear. Um, I wouldn't do drugs in Dubai. Dubai has a very hard line on drugs. And so it's not a place that you go and do drugs. You don't commit crimes in the UAE. Um, and if you're someone that wants to live dishonestly and be a criminal, it's not a good place for you. But if you're someone that wants to live an honest life and you're not really concerned about committing crimes, it's a nice place to be. I mean, I would go to dinner or lunch and leave my purse sitting alone on a table. Um, you come back and there it is. And people will say, yeah, but democracy, and they're very harsh if you do break the law and these kinds of things. And it it makes me think a lot. There are trade-offs, but I don't know, it's tough.
I hear a lot that Dubai is one of the safest places because you can just go out in the open and do stuff. Like you can leave expensive stuff out, nobody takes it. And this is kind of an advantage of having an, let's say, brutal government that has really strict rules.
Right.
But if you can, like El Salvador, for example,
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, the president is so brutal to the gangs and everything." He did also got some innocent people. Like, of course, they had the highest murder rate in the whole world.
Right.
If I'm the president of a country that has the highest murder rate in the whole world, of course I'm gonna do something about it, and of course it
Right.
will be a brutal action. You will get some innocent people probably at first. Then of course after the post brutal action, you can get some innocent people again out. But I heard some stories where a father says, okay, finally I feel good about leaving my daughter out in the middle of the day. She would never go out in the middle of the day without me. Now I can let her out because El Salvador is safe again. So that's an
Yeah.
interesting development in El Salvador with a Bitcoin standard, even though
Right.
how politics think about ruling with gangs is not something that stands in the Bitcoin protocol, but somehow it relates to that. I think it's
Right.
interesting to see.
It is really interesting, and I found myself thinking about this a lot. I had the opportunity to visit El Salvador in November, and it was very safe. And of course, prior to being there, you have the action by Bukele that you mentioned, like the roundup of the gangs. And I listened to the speech that he gave before they went and did that. And I thought it was really inspiring. And I tend to agree with the things that he said, that El Salvador and other countries that are going to move up in the world, economically, geopolitically, they are countries that are going back to morality and rule of law. And conversely, you have countries like the United States, depending on your opinions, a lot of the countries in Western Europe that have abandoned morality, and therefore they're going downwards. They're getting less safe. They're getting less economically advanced. Um, I think it's really hard to argue with that. And of course, there is this criticism that, oh, he's a brutal dictator. Um, but unless you have lived, under gang rule where it's not safe to go out in the middle of the day, where you can't run a business because you're being extorted, by gangs, it's really hard to say. Um, you know, it's a unique thought experiment for me because having been in Dubai and having experienced living in a place that is so safe, um, I realized that this is something that is a priority for me, and that perhaps, I, I don't know, it's tough, but I think the people that are criticizing what's happening in El Salvador are perhaps needing to experience more of the world.
Yes. And I want to come back to one thing you said earlier about Bitcoiners being respective of opinions and not being scared of saying what they want to say. And I always have this one amazing example in my head where I was at a Bitcoin meetup, and there was left to me, like in front of me, there were two people sitting, and the guy left to me was a carnivore, like completely just on meat, like not even just eating everything, normal behavior example, just eating meat. And on the right side, there was a raw vegan. And I just loved that conversation so much because it was such an honest, respecting, and even loving conversation between two people that have about one specific topic a completely
Right.
different mindset, and I found that they are actually finding common ground. They're like, oh, we don't want processed food, we want fresh food. Like there's a lot of things they said that was completely the same thing actually.
Yeah.
And only okay, they're eating completely raw vegan and they only eat meat, so the end product was completely different. But I love that experience, and I think it's more and more with the Bitcoin community. And I'm always thinking about how will that, maybe when Bitcoin gets to a point where this mass adopted, how can that change the whole world and the living together in like the next 20, 40, like let's say 120 years. What's your thoughts on this?
I couldn't agree with you more. I have found Bitcoiners to be very honest and respectful and willing to, you know, share their opinions with you. And so I love that. I I hope that, and I do believe that as we convert to a Bitcoin standard, that there will be a return to values. People will be more honest. We see all of the corruption and just terrible behavior that fiat incentives have enabled and kind of created, whether it's by design or, it's just a result of the way that everything is structured. And so I see Bitcoin as the antidote to that, and returning to a society where you have value in exchange for value instead of just non-productive people everywhere, earning numbers on a screen and math that's happening in banks and all of that. I think a Bitcoin standard on a Bitcoin standard, you have to provide actual value, something of value in exchange for value. And that alone drives a different incentive, and it rewards differently. So it creeps throughout society. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, politics is downstream from culture,
Yeah.
but you have heard that. So I believe that, and I think Bitcoin will help fix the rot that's happening culturally. And if we can fix that and fix the culture and return us to society that, values upward mobility and values success and values creating things of value, that will trickle down to politics and then to your, laws, rules, regulations, and the way that they're implemented. And so I see it really being a driver of a resurgence. I've heard people say there's a renaissance happening in El Salvador, a return to this type of society. And I hope that Bitcoin can do that for many other countries around the world. Which countries will adopt that and allow for those changes to proliferate? I don't know. I can take a guess which countries are open to it and which aren't. But I think that we will see a lot of the world follow in El Salvador's footsteps, and I'm really optimistic about the after effects of that.
That's a beautiful thing that hopefully happens in that way, and I'm really optimistic. Like I'm from a type of person, always a really optimistic guy, and I see that this optimism and this hope Bitcoin also gives more people. I have I just thought about one thing. When you think about Bitcoiners, what are the qualities or the properties of a Bitcoiner that are the same with every Bitcoiner, or is there something like that even?
I find that Bitcoiners, to me, it all goes back to the honesty. Bitcoiners are willing to be honest, and respectful. There, of course, as Bitcoin interest and adoption grows, we're going to have bad eggs. Bitcoin is not going to get rid of bad people. Unfortunately, we're still going to have bad people, but we're still early, and I am enjoying being early because you do see many of these things in common amongst Bitcoiners and people that have adopted Bitcoin into their lives. Again, just the willingness to be honest and respectful of other people's opinions, whether they agree or don't agree. I think it was not so long ago that we lived in a world where it was fine to disagree about a lot of things. And so that's the thing that I love most about Bitcoiners is nobody's afraid to offend you because their opinion differs, because they know that they're going to have respect. It goes both ways.
That's great. For you personally, what are you now doing in Bitcoin, and what are your next steps? What do you want to contribute to the Bitcoin community?
Sure. So I am doing product development right now. I work for one of the original ATM companies here in Florida, in the United States, a company called Byte Federal. I am working on orange pilling everyone so that we can take the entire company Bitcoin only. Right now, I am managing the launch of our merchant point of sale product, and that product is primarily a Bitcoin product. We are looking at opening an office down in El Salvador, and we are also going to be expanding into Dubai. So those are sort of the top priorities for 2024. I'm really excited about that. And, I think going to new conferences, I went to all the US conferences this past year, and I'm looking next year at going to probably Madeira, Prague,
Prague is
and
very recommended.
yeah, and I'm most excited about that. I'm super. That's like number one on my list, actually. I went, in November to adopting Bitcoin down in El Salvador, and I'm hoping to attend that again. So I think for me, really expanding, I think I've met like all the American Bitcoiners, and I love them all. But I'm looking to get outside the United States, and so that's my priority for next year is non-American Bitcoiners and non-American Bitcoin conferences.
As an Austrian, I think this is a great priority. I introduced today actually a new end routine to the podcast, or like a slightly changed end routine to the podcast. Till now, I had the end routine where the previous guest asked the next guest a question.
Okay.
And I will keep that, but I always forget to ask the guest, what question do you want for the next guest? So I was like, let's introduce it directly in the podcast so I cannot forget it. So
Okay.
I will ask you now for a question that's first for me, and but also then for the next guest. Like, what
Okay.
questions do you have for me and for the next guest that will be on the show without knowing what the next guest is?
Okay. So my question would be, I am, working in product development. And so we're looking very heavily at layer 2 and layer 3 solutions like Lightning, of course. I think we're entering a new phase of Bitcoin where um, transacting on the base layer, it has become expensive. I don't think that that's really going to reverse. I think as we move forward, it's a reality that we have to accept and adapt to.
Yes.
So my question would be, if you could have one product solution, what would it be? Like, what is the tool that you would most like to see built in Bitcoin to help solve these solutions or these problems? And maybe we can build it.
I think the biggest problem Bitcoin is solving is the store of value problem, but
Hmm.
it does that really good right now.
It does.
It's the best asset to do that. What There are a lot of things that can happen on the layer 2, layer 3, maybe even layer 4 on top of Bitcoin. But the one thing that we have to nail is being an amazing uh, payment network. And Bitcoin as a base layer has the perfect foundation for that. And I think this is the perfect foundation to build on that. But we have to nail that it's the best payment network, that there are the best apps on that, custodian or non-custodian. Like it just has to be an amazing experience for everybody to show people, hey, see, there's a Bitcoin, let's transfer. Like I always like to show people with Lightning wallets, let it be wallet of Satoshi even, because then it's easier for them. They don't even have to log in and they just can experience it. I like the shining in the eye when I send them a few Satoshis, because it's just so instant and quick. And I know that there are a lot more developments in Bitcoin, but honestly, I only care about the payments. I, 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 I think we nailed the store of value. It will take a
Hmm.
while that everybody notice the store of value and notice that Bitcoin is the best place to put your financial energy. But we also have to nail the payment side, the medium of exchange, because only then, if we actually used for payments, we can also move to a unit of account. And I, I love it has to be like Bitcoin has to be the base layer of our financial system, and then it also has to be the unit of account of everything. The maybe Satoshis, maybe we have to go one step deeper with, I don't know, Nakamoto's or bits or whatever we call it. Because when Bitcoin is adopted for the whole world, I think even one Satoshi would be not enough and not small enough. So this would be my answer, because we just have to nail it. There are a lot of things happening. I know innovations, but this is like, I'm a really basic guy. I want to fix and nail the basics, and then we can do all the fancy stuff.
I agree. I think that's super important. Um, and we are right at that moment in time where this is the problem that we need to solve. I couldn't agree with you more. We have nailed the the savings technology, and we are moving into um, a payment network. So there are solutions out there, but I think there need to be better solutions. And as you said, it has to be very, very easy. We talked a lot in the beginning about like how far behind people outside of Bitcoin are, are no coiners in our life. And not everyone is going to take the time that we are all taking to learn the ins and outs and the complexities and, using all of these different wallets. So I agree with you that super, super simple solutions to enable payments are majorly important. They're probably the most important thing right now for us to get figured out and built and simplified.
Yeah. Then we have still the question from the previous guest to you. And I like this kind of questions the most because the previous guest actually does not know you at all, like does not know who will be the receiving end of that question. The question is, when will real estate investors start to cycle capital into Bitcoin over real estate, and what impact will that have on the price? And
Oh,
you can guess from the question that it was someone that started with real estate, came into equity, and then moved to Bitcoin.
that's a great question. I think we are starting to see just the very beginning of this happening. I don't know what's happening, in Europe, but we are starting to see here in the United States a lot of people who are invested in real estate. Um, the tide is kind of turning, where for many, many years it was just, accepted as common knowledge that buying real estate was a good way to make money. And I think as things are changing, um, we're seeing that that's not always the case. And in fact, in some cases, it might be very wrong that you're not really making money, that you're losing money. Um, so I'm starting to see more of those conversations, comparisons between owning real estate and property, whether it's income producing or not, and just holding Bitcoin, and which of those is going to make more sense for you. And more often than not, it is just holding Bitcoin. So I think you asked when will we see that? And if so, when? I think we will absolutely see that. I think it's going to take time. We're still really early in Bitcoin. And so for people to come to that understanding is going to take some time. But people who are looking at buying and holding real estate, of course, the ones that are educated on it, tend, I think, to do a lot of research and analysis. And so that's why we're starting to see them say, wait a second, let me look at my cost and the turnover of income producing real estate and all of these sort of different layers and complexities where each of those different factors, leave a lot of room for error or miscalculations or something just to go wrong. And on the flip side, you have owning Bitcoin, which is very easy. You don't have to pay for maintenance. You don't have to deal with tenants or any of these things. You don't have to deal with taxes going up or insurance rates, all kinds of unknown factors. So I think we'll see a lot of people moving money from real estate into Bitcoin. And there are a lot of charts out there predicting the impact that could have on price if you just take, total allocation into real estate and take a certain percentage of that and put it into Bitcoin. And I think that easily, I think we're going to see 6-figure US dollar valuation of Bitcoin soon. And maybe not this cycle, but probably by the next cycle, I think that'll kind of be the base, at least. Who knows, really? That's a hard thing to predict, but as
timing of it.
Yeah. As entire industries move a certain percentage of their economies into Bitcoin, it's obviously going to have an exponential impact on the price.
Yeah, and real estate is right now, I think, misused as a store of value.
Yeah.
Because it's just not. It's a business
Right.
that has to be profitable. It's just like a stock. I find it so funny when people say like, "Oh, I want to have real estate to save my money." I'm like, how can housing be money? That's a
Right.
Fiat thing.
Right. But this is kind of one of the things that we like talked about that you have to unlearn because everyone is just taught that like that real estate is a good store of value. Um so, it's wild how much there is to unlearn from Fiat World.
Yeah, it's actually right. So where do you want to point people at? Where can they reach you the best?
I am just on Twitter. So you can find me on Twitter. I am fully doxxed. Um, it's my name, and I will not DM you. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of fake accounts. One of my fake impersonator accounts actually DM'd my boss.
Oh.
Um, and he came to me and said, "Is this you?" And I'm like, "Oh my God." So I guess some of them are quite sophisticated. I answer a lot of my DMs, but I don't really DM someone, especially if I don't know them. So I'm on Twitter and I have a blue check mark. So, follow the real account.
It's crazy. I started to see fake accounts with, I think, even before 1,000 followers. It's
Really?
it was really soon for me.
Yeah,
Now I have 7,000, and I started to not care now.
right.
They are
Yeah,
just,
there's nothing you can really do.
yeah. It's I get once a week a message. Oh, did you know here is a scammer? And I'm like, I did not know about him, but I really don't care at this point.
Right.
It's an X platform mistake, and they will try to fix it. It's a hard problem to get rid of because when so many small accounts have all the spot problems, of course, how can they, like, they don't have an army of people that doing all every day. Oh, is this account a real one? It's like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping they fix it, but like you said, there's nothing really for now that can be done. It's kind of an inevitable. I find that it comes in waves. Like I'll get a whole bunch of them and then, they get purged and you get a little bit of time and then you start getting the messages again like, "Oh, here's a fake one."
And I also see with followers, I think they are having days or even hours where they are deleting a lot of bots. It's not like
Yeah.
gradually, it's like suddenly. And I have sometimes where usually I grow with like 10 to 20 followers a day. So it's like when I see it's like, oh, a little bit came here, but sometimes it's like a day where nothing really happened, like there's not a shitstorm or something, and there's like
Right.
100 followers less.
Hmm.
So I think this is just because they're getting rid of followers. I see that sometimes.
Yeah, I have noticed that it's interesting, but there's there's a lot of love and there's a lot of hate for X. I still have Twitter in my brain. It's hard to change that.
It's
But
okay.
but I'm really thankful for it. I've been able to connect with Bitcoiners all over the world, like you, and I'm so thankful for that. So I hope that they continue to improve some of these things, but it is what it is.
It is the platform where every Bitcoiner is, I think. Like I asked
Hmm.
every person I interviewed where they are, and they all say X, and some say X and YouTube.
Okay, yeah, it
So
makes sense.
it seems to be the town square. Thank you for
Yeah.
being on.
Thank you for having me. It was great talking with you.